The Crypto Markets Update is presented by Grayscale, the world's largest digital currency asset manager.
All right, checking in for a live look at Bitcoin. The CoinDesk Bitcoin price XBX index is currently trading at 33,610. Bitcoin is slightly down, almost 3% over the past 24 hours, and the CoinDesk Ether price ETX index is currently at 2122. Taking our next guest to discuss the crypto markets is Darius, CIO and co-founder of QCB Capital in Singapore. Welcome to the show, Darius. So a question that I often get is now the time to buy Bitcoin?
Well, I think you guys were just discussing exactly what I've been thinking, right? The market's a bit directionless, and we've observed that in the last month or so, Tuesdays mark all the highs and lows, so we've called it turnaround Tuesdays. So if you see, it's just bouncing in a tight range, with Tuesdays marking all the peaks and troughs. And to answer your question as to where the market is looking for yield, there's one place that still has a decent yield, which is the option market. So vols are still trading at around 90 to 100, getting you yields of over 50% on decent strikes. And but I think our biggest call here is that as the market continues to trade in a range, I think the vols will continue to drop as well. So it's sort of the last bastion of yield, and if the market remains directionless, that will drop towards probably a 70 handle as well.
Hey, Darius, exactly that question. You were saying that the place for yields is just with the high vols, and essentially you would, I assume, sell your straddles and strangles there and try to earn some yields while the volatilities go down. But is there any way for is there any direction that the derivatives markets seem to be headed or seem to be pointing towards in the cash market? In other words, is there anything that we're seeing with let's say puts and calls that would indicate that the market expects either a large move up down the road or a large move down in the other direction?
Well, I mean, the option market is still indicating some fear. The fear level has gone down, but the put skew is still quite high, and so it indicates that the market is still pricing in a more likely move to the downside rather than the upside. So so I would say that's the prevailing sentiment. But as vols drop, that tends to be market positive as well. So I would say it's a bit of a mixed signal.
Darius, we've asked some other guests, so we always get different answers. So we're curious to hear what you think. Are we, in fact, in a bear market? Would you define what we're in as a bear market? And if so, how long do you expect it to last?
I personally don't think it's a bear market. The market is still up for the year, and I think we found very good support in Bitcoin at 30K. And in Ether, with the EIP coming up, there's been some attention and some constructive price action as well. And I'm personally quite positive on price. I do think that the market is slightly underpricing the news about El Salvador and Paraguay. Sovereigns declaring Bitcoin and accepting Bitcoin and diversifying their treasuries into Bitcoin is to me is a huge watershed. And I think the market's underpricing that a little bit. And as more sovereigns start to pick up on this, I think it could be a bit of a game changer.
So when we look at what you were saying before, that they were underpricing some of the fundamentals, nonetheless, what do you think caused that run up to 60,000? Is it, I mean, if it's not the kind of fundamentals that were announced subsequent, all right, you had MicroStrategy, you had Tesla announced that they were putting some Bitcoin on their balance sheet, but other than that, you didn't see anything of interest like El Salvador until well after Bitcoin was off those highs. So what led up to that high of 60,000? Was it mostly retail or was it institutional?
I think a mix of both, but the most important thing that led to the high is the access to leverage. The amount of leverage in the market at that point was quite intense, right? it's a market. I mean, insofar as Bitcoin is becoming more institutional, and the infrastructure for trading is improving, we cannot ignore the fact that Bitcoin is a highly speculative, highly leveraged market. So it tends to overshoot and undershoot. I mean, in terms of overshoot, in terms of volatility, in spite of whatever fundamentals are or whatever headlines come up, right? So in the case of run up to 60K, if you look at the funding rates were at some points, the perpetual swaps were trading at the 500% funding rates. That's very unsustainable. So to answer your question, it was really a function of leverage, very, very high leverage being used in the space. And the subsequent move down was then a sort of deleveraging cycle. So we are at a position where the markets are kind of neutral in terms of leverage. The curves are pretty flat out to around 1-2 months, and then pretty linear, sort of a 6-7% in Bitcoin up to next year in June. So I think it's quite neutral now. With the reduced amount of leverage, I think it trades closer to what the fundamental value is, so to speak.
Darius, it's interesting that you said that we're not in a bear market. It seems we always get a different answer depending on who we talk to. But the markets the crypto markets are down. Bitcoin is plummeting. About 40%, had its worst quarter recently. But also, a lot of people want to know, what altcoins are you looking at, particularly Ethereum? Mike Novogratz has said that Ethereum may become the biggest cryptocurrency to flip Bitcoin eventually one day in a recent interview with Bloomberg. Meanwhile, Jack Dorsey is saying a hard no to Ethereum. Where do you stand, and which cryptocurrency out there has the best value to buy right now?
I'm very much in the Jack Dorsey camp. I still believe that Bitcoin is the king coin, right? And the first coin that most folks would buy. I mean, I'm bullish Ethereum as well. But the fact is that Ethereum has a ton of competitors, whereas Bitcoin, in essence, as a core store of value, is sort of a mainstay. So I would say Ethereum has the potential to trade higher than Bitcoin. And volatility-wise, we are long Ethereum volatility and short Bitcoin volatility. So I do think that there could be some good moves in Ethereum. But in the medium to long term, if you ask me which would hold value better, I'm always going to be on the Bitcoin camp.
You said that you think the market is kind of underreacting to news from El Salvador. Is the market overreacting to news from China?
I don't think the market is overreacting to news from China. I think it's a function of real supply from China. There's a lot of I've been watching CNBC. I think they've got it wrong, right? Everyone's asking like, why is it when when they shut mining farms down, supply goes down, shouldn't Bitcoin price go up? No, I mean, if you own a mining farm in China and you get shut down, and your Bitcoin cost price is 8,000, and you're not sure what your next steps are, the first thing you're going to do is sell your Bitcoin stash for security. So it is a function of just actual supply of the Chinese miners selling coins, right? And but in our view, I think that's transitory, meaning that they have a fixed supply. They will sell enough to ensure that they have security for their operations going forward. But they are intending to move wherever they're looking to move to, and they're going to start again. And so the supply is limited in that sense. And I'm actually surprised that it's held up this well in spite of the supply. We spoke to some very large miners, and they're surprised as well because they were the ones, they were selling a bunch of them, and they're surprised it hasn't cracked 30K and stayed below. So I'm actually really positive about this in the sense that there was real supply, but that real supply has reduced, and the price has held up in spite of that.
Do you see continued selling of Bitcoin from these miners who will need the cash to open operations elsewhere? Or do you think that they've kind of
yes, for sure.
They've kind of maxed out on how much cash that they need for this?
No, I think there's still supply, but my view is that the worst is over for now. They've sold a big bunch of it, and a lot of the crackdowns have already happened, and they actually a lot of them actually preempted it slightly. They were already looking at various countries to move their rigs to. So I think the worst is over, but I think we still get a trickle of supply as these miners still are in the midst of shifting operations and closing down the rigs in China.
What's the long-term sentiment that you get from the miners? I mean, how since you're talking to them, what's the feel that you get from them regarding the crackdown and regarding their prospects going forward?
They're extremely frustrated, right? Because I mean, China has always been playing this like hot and cold game. Sometimes they're fine, sometimes they're not. And the truth is that China was a leader in the mining segment of crypto and crypto at large as well. So they're very frustrated that China has taken this stance, and of course frustrated that they have to shut down the operations. And the challenge for them is that there are not many countries that can house huge rigs. I think Canada, US, some of these countries. I think they've been looking hard there, but I don't think they have found a sort of a plug and play solution. So I think the frustration continues. And I think, because of that, we're going to still get supply going on. And, that's why I think, Bitcoin is going to trade in a very tight range with a very hard cap on top. But yeah, there's continued frustration. But they are moving their rigs. So, they are starting to restart operations again. So I think it's quite positive as well.
Do we have a sense of where they're, you were saying that they didn't know whether or not they would move them to, let's say, North America and what have you. But I mean, are they coming up with any interim solutions with where they're moving their rigs? Is it going to Kazakhstan, for instance? I believe it's one of the places.
It sounds like the most viable solution is Texas.
Huh. Texas.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
So,
we did hear about some mining firms airlifting to Maryland, and Texas is welcoming miners right now.
What's the Texas angle that you've heard?
The real large guys, they went through a list of countries, and they're like, the only grid big enough is possibly Texas.